Hi, everybody. My name is Amy Spurling. I'm the founder and CEO of Compt. I will not do any singing hold music as people are joining because that's just cruel and unusual punishment. But I am joining this conversation. I'm really excited to share today, and so thrilled that Bobby has been so gracious about hosting this entire conversation. It's a really important conversation. It has been since the dawn of VC, but right now we're hitting a pretty pivotal moment. So excited to share with everybody kind of what's going on the legal side as we start thinking about bridging the gender equity gap. My background is I'm a 3-time former CFO, 2-time former COO, been in tech for over 20 years, fundraising, helping sell companies for 6 prior white male CEOs, and then started my own company when I turned 40 and found things that were surprisingly different. I shouldn't have been so naive, but I was, and started seeing, kind of looking around and realizing not only I knew the playing field was bad, but it was even worse than I thought. And so this is where I partnered with some people who have been running this process and running some of the legal things that we're going to talk about. I've been working on it for several years, and I joined up with them to offer some support. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. Some of their work and some of the things that we can all be doing to try and level some of the things that are, just holding all of us back in a really frustrating way. I'm excited, this is meant to be conversational as much as possible. So as folks have questions, want to jump in, we want this to be as much of a dialogue as possible because every person's experience is very relevant. And we want to make this conversational as we figure out how we go forward. But we have lots of action items and things that take 10 seconds and things that take a few hours. So depending on level of potential effort, there's things we're going to get into as well.
So everyone, definitely in the chat, let people know where you are calling in from today. Welcome everyone to our Lioness community event for August. And again, Lioness is our digital magazine for the female entrepreneur. We are your source for everything needed to start and run your company. We've got guides, we've got interviews, we've got how-tos. And today we've got a very, very special event. We also, obviously, we're a magazine. So if you are interested in subscribing to Lioness, Laura is going to drop our special offer link in the chat for you. And join us next month, September 12th. We're going to be doing our Lioness Magazine networking. So that will be a meeting that you will be able to come to and meet other Lioness subscribers and people that are interested in connecting with you. So today we are going to be talking about closing the gender investment gap. And Amy already introduced herself. I am so thrilled that she has been basically working with us. She gave us all kinds of fantastic information for an article that we wrote for Lioness, and she's got much, much more to share with us today. So, Amy, take it away and tell us everything we need to know about this incredibly important topic.
Sure, happy to. Yeah. And again, folks, chime in, ask questions. This is meant to be not a monologue for a period of time, but excited to be chatting a little bit more about kind of where we're at and where things are going as we move forward. So the first piece that I wanted to dive in is kind of where level set on where things are right now, generally in the VC funding industry. So women start 50% of businesses, but we receive 1.9% of funding, in 2022. So that was all the funding that all women received, all female founders received, despite starting 50% of those businesses in that time period. For the female founders on this call, that's probably not a surprise because we're all sitting in the same VC pitch meetings and dealing with the same type of thing. So This is down from the massive peak of 2.5%. That's as good as we ever got in the history of women being funded in venture capital. We peaked in 2018 at 2.5%. Like, that is absolutely abysmal. When you start looking at Massachusetts in particular, women receive even less. They receive 0.9% of funding. So if it's 1.9% as the average nationally, we're doing even worse in Massachusetts. And if you look at women of color, it's an absolutely staggeringly low amount of funding that goes to women of color. Like, it's just unacceptable on any level when you've got so many women of color that are building fantastic businesses. But bias comes into play, and when the vast majority of investors are investing in people that look and are like them, that's what we continue to see as this pattern. And so this is kind of where things are right now. Massachusetts is 45th in the entire country for funding female founders, their proportion of funding that goes to women, which means that Alabama funds more female founders than Massachusetts on a percentage basis. This is completely unacceptable on any level, and is something that, really, when you consider how big our venture community is in Massachusetts and how much money, we go back and forth between the second and third biggest funding state. California is the first by a lot. We tie with New York sometimes. Sometimes New York's a little ahead of us. Sometimes they're a little behind us. But there's a lot of funding that comes out of these three major states. And we're not funding women. And that continues to be a pattern. And so something that personally lights a fire under me, gets me pretty fired up about things, but it's figuring out, all right, so what are we going to do? And how are we going to change this? And where can we go from here? And thinking about those types of things. So what we've tried to do is, there's been plenty of people who, there's been plenty of mentoring to go around. I'm sure there's not a female founder on this call that hasn't been offered a heavy dose of mentoring, which is not a bad thing. Mentoring is a great thing, but sometimes you just need the damn check. We need to do something else to move this industry forward, because what's been happening is the same thing over and over and over again. And so we've got to make a change. Waiting for this change to happen and for VCs to recognize that there's an economic impact, that is, the better metrics coming from female founded companies, that we're more capital efficient, that we have better odds of exit, that we've got better odds of having a big win. Like, those things are not moving the needle. And so we're going to have to do something different. What we've been working on, specifically in Massachusetts, is there's a group of several of us, run by an absolutely brilliant woman by the name of Geeta, who comes from venture capital, has started companies, has had multiple exits. She started this process years ago in trying to figure out, all right, how do we actually move this forward on a legislative, in a legislative way? How do we start leveling that playing field? Because it's not going to just magically happen. We're not just going to hit a place where everybody, decides, hey, let's do the right thing, both economically and for our portfolios, and, investing in, diverse founders. And so started this process a few years ago. That's when I joined up with her about 3 years ago to work on this and start trying to push this forward at the state level and see where we could get. And, the legislative process has all been new to me. It's a very frustrating process because I like things to move fast. It's also an odd process. You can walk into a legislator's office and they aren't angry. I cannot imagine someone just walking into, my house. That'd be weird. But walking into my office and being like, hi, you should talk to me right now. That's the way it works at the state house. And so we've been working on getting some bills filed. There's 2 bills that have been filed this year, and one in the Senate and one in the House. And there's links here to each of the different bills, and more information on those to come as well. Where this has been a somewhat collaborative space where the first version VCs do not want this legislation to pass. They don't want to be regulated. And so they work very hard to make sure that this legislation is shut down at every corner as loudly or as quietly as they can. This new iteration that Geeta wrote, I think is quite brilliant, honestly, because it takes some of their objections off the table in a very smart way, and also ties it to current law that make sense. And so laws that should be applied to venture funding because it does have so much of an impact on all of us. So we're going to talk a little bit about that as well, about what's in these. We're also collaborating. California is working on a bill as well. So they and Linus and Bobby put out an amazing piece that talked about both bills. It's a slightly different take on the bill. That they started with the bill that we had filed in Massachusetts and then iterated on it for California. They're moving much faster because their legislative process is different. They also have a lot of support at the governor level that is pushing things through in a really interesting way. And it's more about the laws that we're tackling are a little bit different. They're tackling it from a reporting standpoint, which is a lot more palatable than actual regulation of venture capital for some folks. And so we're taking a slightly different slant on it, but we're both working on this together and collaborating to try and see if two of the states that do the most funding nationally can get something across the finish line here to start moving the needle on changing the funding dynamic and what's happening out in the overall market. I'm going to pause there for a second. Anything, Bobby, Laura, in the chat, Q&A, any questions or anything popping up just before I keep moving?
Oh, we have questions. We have comments. So Amy, if you want to click on the Q&A,
Got it.
will pop it up for you.
Perfect.
And you can see the questions and the comments that are there. So we have one person that's put a number of different questions or comments in the chat.
Perfect. I'm going to start kind of with the one that I see first. I'm not sure that they're in the same order. There's a question of, companies located in California and Seattle, but not Mass, and plenty of women groups in these big blue states. Plenty of VC women that I've met in the last 5 to 10 years graduate from Harvard. Who are they investing in? I mean, the sad reality is that even the female investors that are out there are primarily investing in men. And there's a couple of pieces to that. Some of it is just survival of the fittest. They need to invest in somebody that they think is going to be able to get their next round of funding. Otherwise, they're not going to end up having a portfolio that shows that they are, investing in things that have exits or that can return the fund. So I think there's a piece of that and a fear to that. But unfortunately, a lot of female investors are still investing in primarily, the same as everyone else. They're investing in the white male founders that they're seeing because they're following the same exact pattern in the hopes that that will get them the returns they need and help them fundraise. And so that's a little disheartening, obviously. It's not all of them. And there's entire funds that are primarily and solely focused on funding other types of founders as well. And my investors happen to fall into that category. I've got some amazing early pre-seed investors as well as seed investors that focus primarily on women or people of color. And those, that's everything that they're investing in. So it's a little hit or miss. You still don't find most women. There are not that many women in VC, unfortunately. So they're not being allowed to invest, or if they're being brought in, it's being brought in as a marketing partner rather than an investing partner, is a lot of times how VC firms are saying that they've got, a more diverse investor group. So there's still, the more women that get into venture capital, the better. That also changes the dynamic, but it's not moving fast enough. We're sitting at 1.9%. We're not going to add female investors who are then allowed to actually invest to move at a pace that is going to change this dynamic, which is where I believe legislation is necessary in this. Let me see here. Are there questions on the other two pieces, Bobby? I'm seeing comments, not questions.
It is definitely more comments.
Okay.
And I think, one of them here is specifically about looking at VC funding data. It's disproportionately concentrated into a few men. And
exactly.
So it isn't just women. It is definitely concentrated in a very small group. So there's lots of ways to be disadvantaged when you are a founder, when you are seeking funding. And actually,
Right.
Amy, I wanted to jump in on something you were talking about when we're talking about women venture capitalists. One of the things that I've seen in the past is that a lot of women who are venture capitalists, and by the way, still a very small group,
It is.
they feel like they are under a lot of scrutiny. And
Mhm.
so what ends up happening is they are actually sometimes, not always, less inclined to invest in other women because they feel like
Right.
they have to hold them up to a higher level of scrutiny.
Right. I mean, I've heard that as well, especially with funds that are not focused on women or founders of color. If it's a female investing partner in a more traditional fund, yeah, you don't want to be seen as the woman who only invests in women and be like relegated to that, because then they're just not, you have to get, a lot of times in a lot of venture capital firms, you have to get sign off from other partners for your deal to make it across the finish line. And if they are constantly being shot down and their deals aren't getting funded, they're going to have that, like that same internal struggle. What's been interesting is that as we have started putting this legislation together, we do have some not so, like, we know that New England venture capital is not fans of this legislation. We understand that. We've tried to work with them on crafting legislation that kind of addresses some of their concerns. You know, they're worried that, you know, every female founder may sue them, or that female founders may go out of their way to sue them. I mean, it's the same arguments we heard with, you know, the EEOC when you're hiring people and not discriminating against people. Oh, well, if we don't hire women, women are going to sue us, or people of color are going to sue us. That just doesn't happen. But fine, we will address your concern. And so that's where the legislation has changed in this iteration of what we have filed. But we know that there are female investors who have reached out to us, and within firms that are more traditional firms that are really excited about this legislation as well. They aren't able to go public because they don't want to lose their jobs. But there's a lot of people that are very excited for some change, because they recognize, like, this makes sense for all of us. This isn't asking for something above and beyond. It's making it to where there's a level set of rules that we're all playing by, and that a standard set of criteria that we're getting measured against for how this funding gets distributed.
We've got some other good questions here. This next one, are there any efforts being made to have more women launch venture funds? Could this be an angle to look into? And what are some resources I should know about as well for women in venture?
In launching new funds, I don't know of any resources for women launching new funds. You have to go find limited partners, which is, you know, the corollary I use. I'm not a venture investor. I'm a founder, but the you know, what I use is for a comparison is trying to get your first angel checks. So LPs are people with money or companies with money, and you've got to sell them on how you're going to build out your fund and what your thesis is. And if you don't have a track record, that gets very, very difficult to do for anybody. That's not just women or founders of color. That's anybody. It's hard to start an LP fund or start a venture fund. So I don't know if there's specifically any efforts on that. I don't know what those efforts would even look like, quite frankly, because you have to have that backing from limited partners, and limited partners aren't out there going, hey, I've got a bag of cash, I would really love someone to go invest in X. It's much more the other direction is what I've found. And so I don't know of any specific efforts around that. What I do see is that there are funds that are specifically focused on women or founders of color, and that as they get more and more traction, and as they see incredible returns because of how they're investing, these are not charities. These are not, you know, impact funds from a, you know, we want to do good in the world. That's a good thing. They certainly want to do good in the world, and they're investing in things that are meant to be good for the world. But these are not charity investors. These are capitalist investors that are looking at the best deals and saying, hey, there's an opportunity all these people are missing. I'm going to go after that. As those continue to show returns, that should help with the LPs. And, you know, LP meaning limited partners. So the folks that write the checks into the VC funds, that should help with that to some extent. But that's a very, very long tail. And so,
and there's also something that I think of as the pink stigma.
Yep.
So if you are a female founder and you get your first checks from a angel group, from a special fund that is focused on women, you will find it more difficult to get your second round.
Yep.
Because the thought is you couldn't get money from the real venture capitalists.
Right.
You had to go to something specific to your disenfranchised class.
Right. Which is
That's
so
wonderful.
incredibly ignorant and also frustrating. Yeah, there is a lot of that, but that's where you do see female investors and even entire funds that are female investors that don't have a female founder thesis primarily invest in the same as, you know, their male counterparts, because they're looking at, all right, what's that follow-on check going to look like? If I'm following the crowd and I miss, I'm penalized less than if I don't follow the crowd and I miss. And so they're not taking that risk. And so there's just a different piece there.
Yeah, we've got some other questions
Yep.
coming in as well. Steph is a biochemist and a New York City startup judge. She's saying hello. She said she has seen founders say we don't invest in people that don't look like us.
Investors that say they're not
Yes,
founders.
and they're yes, investors, and they're afraid of the risk. Is this a type of financial discrimination?
I would say yes, but it's not illegal right now. And that's the legislation that we're going after in Massachusetts. That right there shouldn't be what is driving whether or not you invest in somebody. That should be considered, in my opinion, illegal discrimination against folks. Fine, go after thesis, go after, you know, product market fit, go after any number of criteria. I don't think that just because you found a company and you're a woman that you're entitled to a check. That's not the way this works. But what we're seeing time and again is, to your point, Steph, people are saying, I only invest in people who remind me of myself 20 years ago. That is not the way this should work. In the same way, you can't legally do that on a hiring perspective within companies either. Like, you have to think about this a little bit differently. And so that's where we believe that legislation is very necessary to move this needle.
We have another question as well. Unfortunately, funds focused on women of color are now getting sued on
Yes.
equal protection grounds. Can you speak
Yeah.
to this?
This is beyond enraging to me. I mean, so the comment, for those who aren't aware, Fearless Fund out of Atlanta has been sued by the same exact guy who funded killing affirmative action at the Supreme Court. He's decided to go after a fund that I think has written 3 checks, and they were each $20,000, and they were for women of color starting businesses. Like, he's doing this very specifically and going after somebody that presumably he thinks doesn't have means to fight him because he's a billionaire, and who has a very specific thesis, and he can set precedent in law to try and go after everyone else. It's absolutely infuriating for me to see this. I think that, you know, my very cynical workaround would be, fine, don't say that you just invest in female founders or women of color or people of color. Say you invest and your thesis is whatever other thesis, and then just write the checks for the exact people you want to write for. Because you know what? Everyone else is doing that too. That doesn't solve the bigger problem, but that would be my workaround, I think, if I was them. And I'm not a lawyer, so I'm sure their legal counsel has better ideas for them. But
Yeah.
like,
And
these funds that are only investing in white men are not saying that's who they're investing in, but that's exactly who they're investing in. So, okay, fine.
And that actually does answer like one of the questions we have as well. We have a question about, how about women who work for these companies, like the current CTO of OpenAI, who is female? And what Amy was just mentioning with VC firms that don't talk about who they invest in, what I'm finding is there is a little bit of a sense of, I would say, willful ignorance, where the data that is collected about the companies that these venture capitalists are investing in sometimes is used to cloud the issue. And I ran up against this when I went to a conference, actually, the end of July. I asked the conference organizers, you are touting the fact that over 40% of the startups that are here, they said like founded by women. What they were actually using was there is a founding member of the team that is female. I asked specifically to find out which companies were solo female founders, which companies had only female founders, and which companies were being run by or had a member of the female founding team. They had none of this data, never asked that question.
Right. Well, and a lot of times what you find is if there are female founders, the equity split is vastly different. There's not the same level of founder equity. And so it's more like founding team. A lot of times is what you find.
Yeah.
So,
and that's going to make a difference in terms of exits. That's going to make a difference in who becomes an LP and can influence who gets invested in later on.
Exactly. So we're seeing a lot of that.
Keep going, Amy.
All right. So let's see here. So let's talk about what's actually in this bill that we have out there right now, just so that we can talk about that a little bit more specifically. So there's three things. So one, it'd be make it unlawful for any person or business to grant funding or engage in investment transactions to sexually harass or discriminate against. So unlawful use of an investor of power. So this mirrors a lot of employment law where, you know, as a boss, you cannot sexually harass your employees. That's illegal. And abuse that power, because investors do. I mean, we've seen this, you know, there was a lot through the Me Too movement, especially we saw a lot in California, but it also happens in Massachusetts where there is a different power dynamic. And if the person who is giving you funding is sexually harassing you, you've got a mismatched power dynamic. And so making that illegal as it is part of this bill. This is not something that we have heard is contentious. So this is something that the VCs are like, all right, fine, maybe this could be a law. And so this is something that we think should be pretty palatable. We don't think it's any VC's business model in Massachusetts specifically, because that's where I live, that they want to go out and sexually harass women, and so this is something that is part of the bill. We're also looking at, you know, extending the sexual harassment general protections to venture capital, like the venture capital harassment or the investor relationships. So kind of making it like the landlord tenant as well. It's the same idea. So following patterns that are in laws already, but applying it to a new spectrum. So a lot of that landlord tenant piece too. And then the last piece is following fair lending laws. So there are banking laws out there right now that say how banks, they don't say who a bank has to give money to. In the same way, nobody is looking, or at least with this legislation, what we're not looking for is for the government to determine who gets VC funding. We're not looking for that. We're not looking for the government to decide which companies get funded or which thesis. Like there's a lot of innovation and creativity that happens, and it's coming through the private sector. We want to preserve that. But fair lending laws, in the same way bank lending laws make it to where you can't illegally, you know, can't discriminate against people because in certain classes. This is applying that to that same scenario because it's a pattern match to that. So in the same way bank lending can go to lots of different types of people, so can VC funding. And so it's holding an industry accountable to make it to where fair lending laws do apply, and having them report how they are investing in folks too. So it's an accountability piece where they're reporting up to the state what portion of their investments go to women, to people of color. And if the state wants to take a deeper look, they can. So what it does remove is the individual. I could not, if I got passed on for funding, I'm not going to sue a VC, but the state could look at it in the same way the state could look at and have oversight over banking. So it's applying law that already exists in a very like a similar fashion to way that funding happens out there. I'm going to pause there for a second. make sure that this stuff makes sense.
We have quite a conversation going on in the chat
Okay.
about government money being used and tax credits, and
Yep.
also conversations about funding for companies without products, without traction,
Right.
which, you know, every time I've talked to venture capitalists, either on my own or behalf of clients, let's talk about your traction.
It's
Well,
always traction, right? And it's always a
traction.
little bit more further down the road. I mean, this law is not going to change that, just to be blunt. Like this law is not going to change whether or not, somebody gets funded for an idea on a napkin, and has like the new hottest, like I think this week, the topic du jour is what, superconductors. 2 weeks ago, it was generative AI. Like the topics keep moving. This isn't going to change that dynamic. What this is going to do is take a step forward in trying to level that playing field so that as funding is happening, we're applying common sense law to the way funding is happening. So there's banking law, there's VC funding law. Like it's applying some of those regulations and some of that oversight without stipulating this company can get funded, that company can't. We don't want the government involved in that. That's not what our goal is here. It's literally just apply some common sense law and regulation to this. All right. From here, so that's the vast majority of what's in those two laws that are, being pitched to both the Senate and the House. For my next section, I was going to go through like how you can get involved, how you can help. But before we get to that, want to be able to have a conversation as well. Bobby, I know you had some questions too. Oh yeah, Allison Byers and Geeta are both in the audience, which is fantastic. If either of you would like to jump in and add color to this, poke it, Bobby or Laura. I don't have controls here. Happy to have you join.
Raise your hand, use your raise your hand function. So first, like, I think one of the big questions I always have is the difference between what's happening in California and Maine. And that's actually a question. If Allison comes up, I'm going to hit her with that.
Perfect.
I got asked this question, Amy. Have you seen any backlash for your role in getting this project off the ground?
It's tough to say, right? Were they not going to fund me before? Probably. Odds were that they weren't. So potentially when we did this 3 years ago and testified at the State House, I didn't realize that I was going to be like the primary founder who was testifying. I didn't quite realize that. And I went in and testified, and it was a very full room. And then right after me, you had a bunch of New England venture capital go up and testify on the other side. And it was a bunch of women that I know. And so they used women to go and testify on the other side of it. That was very uncomfortable, very, very uncomfortable. But at the same time, I don't know that it's really changed anything. I am not fundraising, which also, for better or worse, means I'm not like backlash isn't going to hit me on this right now. And so I have the ability to use a pretty safe position and a pretty privileged position in that, where I'm not fundraising. If they don't like it, there's not a lot that can happen right now. And ultimately, we're trying to do something that is for the economic collective good. This is not meant to penalize VCs. This is meant to make all of us a lot better. And so I think the folks there are a lot of folks that recognize that. So I'm sure I'm making some folks unhappy, but I realized like where I went back and forth on this when Geeta first approached me, and I was very concerned because I wasn't a fundraising process then, but I realized that I'm sitting in a position where I've got an over 20-year career. I've raised at least one round of funding per year for each of those 20 years across all of these companies. So there's not many people who have more experience than me being in this room, hearing these VC conversations, being part of that pitch, closing money, and seeing how different it is now as a female founder. Like I'm sitting in a position where I have a lot of data, where a lot of first-time founders have no idea, is this normal? Is this not what I'm up against? Like, what's happening to me? Is that just what happens to everybody? I know what's normal and what isn't. And so if I don't speak up, I hit the point where I was like, I can't live with myself if I don't try and make change. And so that's where I just decided, all right, we're going to light some things on fire. We're going to light some things on fire. We're going to be for the best for all of us. We're going to have better companies that ultimately rise out of this, that have more economic impact, which is better for all of us.
All right. And who else has been getting involved in lobbying for gender equity funding? Are there groups that we can look to?
Yeah, for gender equity and funding, there are groups that quietly support or publicly support. So we've got a lot of, in fact, if I think Geeta is going to jump in, she actually has a lot of folks that she's been working with, and so she on getting folks, like a coalition of folks, but a lot of it, like where I focus my time is on the kind of founder startup side, whereas Geeta spends a lot more of her time on the kind of coalition and group side of things.
Okay.
But
I'm always reluctant to, like, say to somebody, come on up, if they haven't,
I know.
given
If she
me the
doesn't, then
wave.
it's fine. If she hasn't waved at you, that's fine. I won't put her on the spot either. But I will say, like, for my part, where I've spent my time and where I bring energy is, one, being able to get the message out to folks, and then also really working within the founder community to get support across all segments. Because what I'm finding is that it's not that, male founders are like, no, we've got to keep what's ours. We don't want this. I'm finding that there's a lot of support for this kind of across there. It's not a zero sum game here. And so there's just a broad reaching support. It's not like this is only women and, founders of color that are like, hey, remember us. There's actually a lot of collaboration kind of across what I'm finding.
And Geeta did leave a comment. She said it's
Okay.
a $2 trillion economic investing blind spot, according to Citibank and Morgan Stanley. So why is this such a hard concept for the industry to grasp? This is going to create a bigger industry and effectively double things.
Right.
That's crazy.
And that's where it's like the economics don't change. Like, that's the thing. Like, the economic argument is not moving the needle for folks, and the do the right thing is not moving the needle for folks, which is where you need legislation to move things.
Right. And we do have question and a hands up from Stephanie. So Stephanie, I'm gonna allow you to talk. So if you want to run away, that's cool too. But hi.
Hi.
Yeah, thanks for taking my call. This is a great opportunity. I think you and the speaker are like very brave, like David and Goliath, to take on this industry. I have a medicinal chemistry polypharmacology company, and we're on our way to moving to Massachusetts next year. So I'm just wondering, what are some of the other things that we can say to these investors when they say things we're afraid of risk? Should we give away a lot of equity? Or, also, how many foreign investors should we get? Would that also help them realize we're not about to waste their money or their time? I have a background in surgery and lab management. I don't believe in wasting time and money, but any advice in letting the investors know we're not out there to take their money. A lot of this has been in the news, fake results, magic boxes,
Right.
this kind of thing. What can we say exactly? Let them know we're real. We believe in honest chemical innovation. Thank you.
I think that the piece that I'm not in your space, so I can't speak to specific investors. Massachusetts is a great place for health tech and biotech. We have a lot of that here. It's one of the biggest investments that the state makes, or one of the biggest areas that gets investment. So certainly good for that. I don't know if you have to move your company here for that, but it's not a bad place to be looking for investment.
We found lab space, so
Oh, perfect. Yeah, we've got tons of that here. Like, that's definitely like one of the big things that we have in Massachusetts is a lot of lab space. In fact, my downstairs neighbor in my condo building, she's the CEO of a biotech with a bunch of lab space in Massachusetts. She and I've talked about that a lot.
That's wonderful. Very good.
What I would say is it's about finding investors that are specific to your space. I find I'm speaking, my company is an HR tech company. When I talk to investors that don't already invest in my exact space, which is in compensation, they get very nervous because they don't know what they don't know. And so I think in your space, it's finding folks that invest in some very narrow niche. It's probably not just a biotech investor. It's somebody who invests in your specific space because they're going to understand what the heck you're trying to accomplish and have enough information to be pretty dangerous on saying, this is an innovative way to do it. I've personally found more traction within the VC community when I target those folks, which by the way, I smashed my face against a wall a whole bunch of times early on here because in my prior companies, I didn't necessarily need to do that. It was SaaS companies. So it was like you go to anybody who invests in SaaS and you get your check and it happens in 2 months and it was amazing. I thought that was normal.
Oh, wow.
No. That's not what happened here. That was what happened with my white boy founders. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
What happens when I started doing that, even though we're a SaaS platform, was I realized that my niche in SaaS, like I already had things that were going to be stacked against me. So I had to go after the folks who invested in our specific niche, and then I could get some traction. And that's ultimately where I found really incredible investors. But I needed to go much more targeted than I had ever before because I was going to run and, there's roadblocks, it's tough out there. You got to go very, very targeted to save your energy and just go after the folks who got the best chance at closing.
Well, thank you very much for the advice and good luck.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank
You
you.
too.
Your journey. Thank you.
Yeah. Cool. All right.
And we also have, I thought there was a question there. Dun, dun, dun. Nope. All right.
Okay. I'll keep
good.
going.
Keep
All right.
going.
So, folks, we've got a few different ways you can help with this legislation. And I've got it starting from taking almost no time. So, making it as easy as possible for you to help. There's links. I know Laura's dropping links into the chat as well. There's also a QR code on the screen. If that's easier for you, we will share this deck after the fact, happy to make this as easy as possible. First thing, sign the petition to just say that you support this legislation. That's really helpful because we need to have as many signatures as possible as we go into the legislators and, the bill should be heard, we believe, in November. We need to show as much support as possible. So signing up to sign that petition takes very little time. It's almost no effort. Please do that if you're game to support this. And if you have questions, reach out to me. I will personally help you with it. If you have a few more seconds, here's another way you can support. If you sign up to receive our updates. So we send out, and Geeta manages this beautifully. She has information that gets sent out to folks who want to know where we are in process. When do we have a meetup coming up at the State House? What's going on with the bill so that you can just get email updates as well. And again, QR code, if that's the easier way to do it, or there's a link, you can sign up there, but takes no time. And then you can kind of stay abreast of where we're at. I'm going to pause there just so that folks can do what they need to do.
And the link is in the chat as well.
Perfect. Thank you. If you have 5 minutes, we're looking for quotes from folks. So what does this legislation mean to you? How would this be important? Where you have stories you want to share, because we can turn it into written testimony. If that's something that you want to do, you do not have to do that. We're cognizant of the fact that it can be really scary to do some of this stuff. We understand that. And so we want to do this in a way that is comfortable for folks and support them as well. If you want to share your quote anonymously, that's also an option in that link so that you don't have to share your name or your company. If you're afraid of backlash, we get that. But if you're willing and open to leaving a quote, the more we can have, the better, just so that we can share that again with the legislators. What we've heard, we went and did a walkthrough maybe, I don't know, it was a month ago or 2 months ago. I have no concept of time, but we went through the State House, a group of us, to go and stop at all these different legislators' offices, give them a handout about the bill, talk to them about why it's important. And what we found out is that the VC community is up there very, very frequently. And they're doing all of this behind closed doors. They're not going to come out and say, hey, we want to continue discriminating. Nobody's going to say that, but they're going to work the back channels because there's a lot of money and they don't want to be regulated. And what we're finding out is that there is an appetite at the State House that they are interested in adding some regulation. Legislators in a lot of these districts are looking at it saying, all right, So we've seen banking collapse. That's not very nice for my constituents. We've seen, and that's a lot of it is driven by what's happening in the tech community. We're seeing companies get funded that don't make sense. We've seen crypto go bananas. We're just seeing all these areas where there's no regulation. There needs to be some regulation. And so we believe that there's a really good appetite right now for some of this to change. And so the more support we can show, the better. What we're looking for and what we've seen is that bills that ultimately get approved typically have 35 to 50 co-sponsors on the bill. Right now, we've got, I think, about 20. So we're part of the way there, but we need to get more sponsors on these bills. And the more support we can show, the more supporters we get. And then it just kind of steamrolls from there. So looking for folks to leave a quote. I've got a link here for you to be able to send an email to your rep and your senator. And I've got a link actually on the next one for how to find out who your rep and senator were. I honestly, I'm not super wired in on politics, or I wasn't. And so I didn't know this either, but there's a way, like, we've drafted a template. You can edit it, send them an email, like trying to make it as easy as possible, but share with them why this is important. It's an email between you and the senator. It's not something that, you know, is going to be handed back over to VCs that you may be concerned about. So this is a way that you can also show support, is drafting that email, sending it over to your rep and your senator, and getting some of that support. And just another way to approach them. We're kind of approaching this from a multi-pronged marketing approach, hitting them from as many angles as possible. We're doing some in person, we're doing some email, we're doing some quotes, we're doing some petitions. We want to stay top of mind with them. There's lots. I mean, the number of bills these folks are looking at is a lot. One of the committees is looking at, I think, 700 bills this session. That's a ton for them to figure out what's going to pass, what's not, what gets kicked out, you know, all of those things. We think that right now is the right moment, and we've got enough traction to be able to get ours over the finish line, but we want to get as much groundswell support as possible as we go through that. Before I keep going, I just want to see if there's any questions. I think you've got all the links. Thanks, Laura. All right, I think we're good. We'll keep going. And then the last piece here, is the last piece? Did I lie? No, it is the last piece, is that once we get to September, we think that we're going to be before the legislature and before the Judiciary Committee in particular in November. That's what we believe is the timeline. You never actually know the exact day. Again, legislative process, it's new to me. But these folks tend to be in their offices on Thursdays. And so there's certain times of day, you go before 11:30, you show up at 1:30, they're out of session. They tend to be in their offices, and you can literally walk in and talk to them. Again, this makes the introvert in me very uncomfortable because I cannot imagine someone walking into my office without an appointment, but this is the way things get done, apparently. We're looking for folks that are willing to go in and stop by their rep's office, stop by their senator's office. We've got members of the judiciary that were also on our list. There's 5 or 6 people there. Actually, I think it's about 10 people there. So going in, you literally can drop off a flyer, just ask the person, hey, are they supporting this bill? Hey, it's important to me. It can be like a couple-minute conversation. It's very fast and simple, and a lot less painful than I thought it was going to be when we did this the first time. But we're looking for folks to sign up. And there's a QR code and a sign-up sheet there for when you could potentially do that. It can be on your schedule. Pick a time that works for you. And then we'll probably have some folks there to help as well, to help coordinate. So if we start seeing folks are going to be there on a certain day, I live in Cambridge, and so I can pop over and kind of help you through the process and talk you through it. But trying to get folks to stop by and say, hey, this is important, so that they have a steady stream of people coming to visit them for the 2 months leading up to this, to be like, okay, I keep hearing about this thing. This is obviously very important, and they take it seriously. Within that sign-up sheet, it also has the how to find your rep and your senator, so that you can see, like, all right, who is my person? And so there's a link in that on that sheet, so you are able to see that as well. But lots of different ways that you could help support.
And we do have to clarify our question to clarify. It's
Sure.
important for constituents in a district to reach out to their senator and rep and ask them. This is constituent advocacy, and it's very effective.
Yes.
It lets them know it's someone who voted in their district wants them to support this bill.
That is correct. That is absolutely correct. Thank you for that.
And that was a note from Gita.
He does fantastic. She's hiding today because I know she works within the legislature as well, so she's got to keep a little bit of a wall there. But is the absolute mastermind behind all of this work that is getting done, and has been the driving force for many years. And so this would be absolutely nowhere without literally all of her hard work. I'm just the person who is on this webinar.
And we also had a question asking if this bill is support for Massachusetts residents.
It would be folks it would be folks who vote in Massachusetts. So yes.
But one of the
But as
things is, this is an example.
Exactly. Well, and where you see California and Massachusetts move, I mean, those are two of the three biggest funding states. If you get New York in there, then that's the vast majority of all funding for everyone. And so that will have a really big impact on how venture gets distributed kind of going forward. So yes, it's for Massachusetts residents, but it has further reaching implications from that, because Massachusetts investors are not just investing in Massachusetts. They're investing in California. They're investing in other places. And so, there's some bleed over pieces to that as well.
Yeah.
They would only be accountable for this in Massachusetts, but they would need to be investing in women or founders of color all over the place.
Yeah. And, organizations across the country can also support the bill.
Exactly.
No matter where you are, this could potentially impact you, especially if it gets passed in Massachusetts, if the bill gets passed in California, other states and other representatives may take notice.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So
let's see it happen other places. All right. What does the timeline look like for this, Amy?
So legislative kind of meetups, hopefully in September, October. We believe that the bill is going to be heard in November. And then it's, does it get kicked to the next phase? What does that look like? Like a lot of this is figuring out when this would actually be able to become law. But there's going to be some voting that happens in November. So our push right now is get to November and have as much support and as many co-sponsors as possible, because as I start meeting about it in the Judiciary Committee, that's where we want to show that support. And that's where, when it comes out of that committee, there would already be broad base of support to vote it into law.
Right. And actually, Sandy Lamb dropped some resource into the chat for everyone. I know has to run, but interesting link for a women-funded organization. And if anyone has some questions, she is offering herself and her email address as a resource. So thank you, Amy.
Amazing.
Really appreciate it.
Sure.
Okay. And a couple of more questions. What are our chances? What do you think, Amy?
I honestly feel very, very positive about this through this legislative session. We've got a female governor. We've got a female mayor of Boston. We've got a lot of frustration with what has happened economically because of the lack of regulation in the VC community. And so there's a groundswell that is pushing this to a moment where I believe that we've got a really, really good chance at having this kind of go through. The opposition is less. Last time through, so 3 years ago in that session, it was a lot more vocal opposition. It's quieter now. It doesn't mean it's not happening. It's definitely happening behind closed doors, but they know they can't be as public about it right now too. And so I think that there is more of a moment of acceptance that something's going to have to change. Like, we're at this moment where things have to change. Like, the way venture is distributed just doesn't make sense. And we can't be driving collapses in industries, where it's a completely wide open, unregulated industry. And so I think we've got a good shot.
Okay. All right. We are coming toward the end of an hour. I know we put in place until 7 o'clock Eastern, just in case, but hey, we're all busy and we've now got some activities. So I kind of built in an extra half hour for you if you did grab some of those links for you to go off and do something. So if you did set aside that extra time, you now have about a half an hour to go and actually accomplish something with your newfound knowledge. I put into the chat the link to the fact sheet. We have put into the chat the other various and sundry links, including a link to our article on Lioness Magazine with all kinds of great background and information. And Amy, any kind of last words?
Please, at the minimum, sign up for that petition to support. At the literal very least, please sign that petition. Everything else, we would love to have you as well, but that takes 30 seconds, and the more support we can show, the better.
Awesome. All right. Thank you again, everyone, for attending. We will be sending out tomorrow recording and all the different links, all of the information. You will be getting that tomorrow. And if there are any questions, definitely give us a yell, contact us, and we will see what we can do in terms of chasing down additional information. And also, thank you, Amy. Thank you, Keita. Thank you, Allison, for the work that you are doing on behalf of us all. I've been involved in the high-tech industry since the mid-'80s. And I still remember back in the mid-'80s looking at the numbers around funding for female-founded companies and going, well, that's abysmal. My gosh, it is almost 40 years later and it still is abysmal.
Yes, it is.
So whatever we can do, whatever small progress, again, small progress. So thank you again for joining us today, and good luck and better funding to you all.
Amen to that.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.